All right, so these are two review problems from yesterday with sequences to complete the pattern. So go ahead and look at the top one. We can see that going from 1 to 2 could possibly be a plus 1, or it could be a times 2. So if we tried plus 1, we would see that 2 plus 1 does not equal 4, so we're going to go ahead and times 2. Then we're going to check, does 2 times 2 equal 4? Yes. Does 2 times 4 equal 8? Yes. And does 2 times 8 equal 16? So we know that the rule is times 2. So when we do that, we do 16 times 2, and we get 32. 32 times 2, we get 64. And 64 times 2, we get 128. On the next one, we have to deal with positive and negative relationships, so you want to make sure that when you're looking at these, you know that when you multiply two negatives, you get a positive, or when you multiply a negative and a positive, you get a negative. So we see that in our first one, we need to go from negative to positive. The only way to do that is to multiply by a negative number. And I notice I'm going from 1 to 4, so 1 times 4 is 4. So I'm going to check that. So is negative 4 times positive 4 negative 16? Yes. Is negative 16 times negative 4 positive 64? Yes. So then we're going to go ahead and we're going to say 64 times negative 4. That's negative 256. And if you notice the pattern, it has a negative, then a positive, then a negative, then a positive. So you should make sure you're following that in your answers. Multiply negative 256 by negative 4 and get 1,024. And then one more time by negative 4 and get negative 4,096. So those are your review on patterns from yesterday. Going on to today's work, we are going to be writing function rules from tables, and you want to notice that the table on the right is horizontal. That's okay. They can be written vertically as well. So what's my rule? When looking at a function table or an input and output box, as you might have referred to in 6th grade, we can write the relationship between x and y values formally. The function rules are written in the form y equals mx. So they have to be in this form when you write them in this rule box here. So there's a few ways to go about this. I traditionally like finding it by saying, okay, well, here equals y equals mx. So you're probably wondering, what do these all stand for? Well, the x stands for our input number. The y stands for what we get out, output number. And then what does m stand for? Well, m is going to represent our slope. And we're going to gradually learn about slope this week and also next week. So don't be concerned if this isn't the first time you've seen the letter M used for slope. It just means the rise over the run. So we're going to find, or the change in y over the change in x. And as you can see in these charts, we have an x and a y. And we're going to begin talking about those things little by little each day. But for today, I'm going to introduce it as you're going to use the inputs and the outputs to find your M or find your slope, which is going to be your rule. So what we're going to do is I like using the first set of numbers in each as long as they're not 0, 0. So I'm going to say, well, x is 1, so I'm going to put 1 in for x. Y is equal to 4, so I'm going to put 4 in for y. And I'm finding what m is or what our slope is, so I'm going to leave that there. This looks a little bit odd because the variable's on the right, and I didn't put the constant in front of the variable, but I'm just going to divide by 1 on both sides so that I can cancel my 1's. And then 4 divided by 1 gives me 4, so m is equal to 4. I'm going to take this answer here, and I'm going to put it in my rule. So I'm going to write it as y equals 4x. And that's your answer for today. So I'm going to do 2 more for you on the next slide, all using that same form, y equals mx. So if we're concentrating on just this one, y equals mx. I'm going to highlight my first set of numbers because that's what I'm going to use. I'm always going to pick those, but it should work for all of them. X is 2, So m, then 2 in parentheses, and y is 80. I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. Cancel my 2's because they equal 1. Bring my m down. And 80 divided by 2 is 40. So when I put that in my rule form, y equals, I'm going to substitute in m, or 40 for m, so 40x. And that's my final answer right there. Now, let's say you chose to use the 6 and the 240. Well, it's going to still come out the same, and I want to prove that. So y equals mx. In this case, x is 6, and y is 240. If I divided by 6 on both sides and canceled my 6's, I'd still get m by itself. And 240 divided by 6, 6 goes into 24 4 times, and 6 goes into 0 0 times. So there you go. Your m is still 40 no matter if you chose 2 and 80, or 6 and 240, or 4 and 160, or 8 and 320. But like I said, I always like to choose the first set. All right, so we're gonna, again, I'm gonna choose the first set. Write my form, y equals mx, and plug in x, -1. Plug in y, which is 2. Divide by -1 on both sides. And 2 divided by -1 is just -2 equals m. So in my rule, I write it as y equals -2x. So if you notice something, if you haven't already caught on, anytime you have a 1 in the x box, if you look below it, the y is your m, or your slope. So if you look right here, it tells us y is -2, and look, our m is -2. And I'll point that out in some of the other ones you see that have a 1 in them. Whereas the example I just did on the left, it didn't have a 1 value, so you do have to go and figure out the change in y and the change in x, or put them in as an input and output and find m. So moving on to the we do slide, since I'm not here, I'm just going to go through and do these like I just did the last two. Choosing my first box of numbers. Now don't get confused, the 1 is in the y column. So we still want to use y equals mx, substitute in that 1 for y, substitute in that 2 for x, and this time I'm dividing by 2. Well, when I divide by 2, if you notice, that gives you 1/2, or 1/2. You can just leave that, m equals 1/2. You don't necessarily need to change it into the decimal, so you would just write y equals 1/2 x. That'll also make it a little easier in the end when we actually use slope on graphs. Write the rule for the following. So again, using y equals mx. Now this one does have that value for 1, or you could use the first one. It will come out the same either way. You could literally say, okay, well, if 1 equals 0.4, that's got to be my m. And I'm going to prove that to you on the right using -2 and 0.8. So 0.8 is y, -2 is x. If I divide by -2 on both sides, I get m equals -0.4. So y equals -0.4x. Hopefully you're catching on that this is the same every single time I do it. Go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try both of these. So do the turn and talk with a neighbor, and then do the you do problem by yourself, okay? Come back to the video and I'll go through them. So y equals mx, choosing the first one, I put in 12 for y, I put in -1 for x. I divide by 1 on both sides, and m equals -12. So the rule is y equals -12x. And then if I go to the last slide, I cannot use the first box because it is 0, 0. It will not work. So I have to go to the second box. Y equals mx. Y is -4. X is 1. Divide by 1 on both sides, and m is equal to -4. But that could already be shown because of that 1 in the x. I automatically know m is going to equal -4 if it's the y. So y equals -4x. All right, so when you do your independent practice today, there's going to be problems like this. There's going to be some review from patterns, and there's also going to be some review from coordinate planes since that's on your quiz on Friday. Please make sure that when you're writing your coordinate plane quadrants, that you write them as Roman numerals.